It was a chilly evening in November 1993 when the small town of Willow Creek lost its innocence forever. The streets were lined with oak trees, shedding their autumn leaves, creating a rustling carpet that masked the sound of footsteps approaching the Bennett residence. Residents of this tight-knit community believed they were safe from the violent crimes that plagued big cities, but that illusion shattered instantly. A single phone call to the local dispatch center at midnight changed everything, sending a ripple of fear through the neighborhood that would last for 3 decades. The silence of the night was broken by the wail of sirens piercing the air and signaling the start of a mystery that would haunt detectives for generations. The victim was Sarah Bennett, a beloved high school librarian, known for her gentle demeanor and dedication to her students. She lived alone in a modest 2-story house at the end of a quiet lane, where neighbors usually kept their doors unlocked. When police arrived at the scene, they found the front door slightly ajar, swaying gently in the cold wind. Inside, the house appeared undisturbed at first glance, with family photos still sitting upright on the mantelpiece and a half-drunk cup of tea resting on the coffee table. However, the sense of dread intensified as the officers moved toward the back of the house, where the master bedroom was located. Detective Thomas Miller was the first investigator to step into the bedroom and witness the tragic aftermath of a brutal attack. The room was in disarray, with drawers pulled out and clothes scattered across the floor, suggesting a struggle had taken place. Sarah lay motionless near the window, and it was immediately clear that she had fought bravely for her life against an unknown assailant. The brutality of the crime scene shocked even the most seasoned officers in the department, who had never seen such violence in their peaceful town. Miller knew immediately that this case would require every resource available, but he had no idea that the answer would remain out of reach for 30 years. The initial investigation kicked off with a frenzy of activity, as forensic teams combed every inch of the property for clues. Fingerprints were dusted, and photographs were taken from every conceivable angle to preserve the scene for future analysis. In 1993, DNA profiling was still in its infancy, and not the standard tool it is today. Investigators collected biological samples found under the fingernails of the victim, hoping that science would one day catch up to the criminal. They carefully bagged the evidence and stored it in a climate-controlled locker, unaware that these tiny microscopic fragments held the key to solving the puzzle decades later. Detective Miller spent the following weeks interviewing every person who knew Sarah Bennett, trying to find a motive for the senseless killing. He spoke to her colleagues at the library, who described her as a woman without enemies or secrets. Neighbors reported seeing a dark sedan parked down the street earlier that evening, but no one could recall the license plate number or the description of the driver. The lack of witnesses and the absence of forced entry led police to believe that Sarah might have known her killer, or that the attacker was a master of stealth. Tensions in the town rose as rumors spread, and residents began to look at one another with suspicion. As the months turned into years, the leads began to dry up, and the phone calls to the tip line became less frequent. The case file for the murder of Sarah Bennett grew thicker with reports and dead ends, but the killer remained a ghost. Detective Miller kept a framed photograph of Sarah on his desk as a constant reminder of his promise to find justice for her grieving family. He spent countless nights reviewing the evidence and replaying the timeline of events in his mind, searching for something he might have missed. The frustration of not being able to solve the case weighed heavily on him, and the community slowly resigned itself to the idea that the truth might never be known. By the early 2000s, the case had officially gone cold and was moved to the archives in the basement of the police station. New detectives joined the force and looked at the file with fresh eyes, but the lack of physical evidence linking a suspect to the scene remained a major hurdle. The biological samples collected in 1993 were retested using newer technology, but the DNA profile generated did not match anyone in the National Criminal Database. It seemed that the killer had never been arrested for a felony before, or had managed to avoid the legal system entirely. The hope for a resolution dwindled as the years marched on. Technology continued to advance at a rapid pace, and the field of forensic genealogy began to emerge as a powerful tool for law enforcement. In 2018, the capture of the Golden State Killer using public genealogy databases changed the landscape of criminal investigation forever. This breakthrough inspired a new cold case unit in Willow Creek to take another look at the Sarah Bennett murder. They realized that the killer might not be in a criminal database, but his relatives might have uploaded their DNA to a commercial ancestry site. This new angle provided a glimmer of hope in a case that had been shrouded in darkness for nearly 3 decades. The cold case unit retrieved the original biological evidence from the storage locker and sent it to a specialized private laboratory for advanced sequencing. The process was delicate and risky because the sample was small and had degraded over time due to the age of the material. Scientists worked tirelessly to extract a viable genetic profile that could be used for genealogical research. After weeks of anxious waiting, the laboratory notified the detectives that they had successfully built a comprehensive DNA profile of the suspect. This was the first major break in the case, since the night of the murder and excitement surged through the department. With the new DNA profile in hand, investigators enlisted the help of a genetic genealogist to build a family tree based on the suspect. The genealogist uploaded the profile to a public database and began the tedious process of searching for distant cousins and relatives. The initial search returned matches that were only distantly related, likely third or fourth cousins, who had never met the killer. It was a massive puzzle, requiring the genealogist to trace lineage back to great-grandparents, and then move forward in time to find all living descendants. The web of family connections spanned across multiple states and required hundreds of hours of research to untangle. Slowly but surely, the list of potential suspects began to narrow as the genealogist eliminated individuals based on age and location. The focus shifted to a specific branch of a family that had lived in the county during the early 90s. The team identified 3 brothers who fit the demographic profile of the killer and lived within a 20-mile radius of Willow Creek at the time of the murder. This was a monumental leap forward, but the detectives knew they needed concrete proof before they could make an arrest. They needed to obtain a DNA sample from one of the brothers without alerting them to the investigation. Surveillance teams were dispatched to watch the 3 brothers, who were now living quiet lives in different parts of the state. The primary suspect emerged as a man named Arthur Jenkins, who worked as a truck driver and had no prior criminal record. Jenkins lived a solitary life in a rural area, making it difficult for detectives to get close enough to retrieve a discarded item. The team watched him for days, waiting for him to throw away a cup or a cigarette butt that could be tested. The tension was palpable as the detectives knew that one wrong move could spook the suspect and cause him to flee. Finally, the opportunity arrived when Jenkins stopped at a local diner for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon. Detectives dressed in plain clothes sat at a nearby table and watched as he drank a glass of water and wiped his mouth with a paper napkin. When Jenkins paid his bill and left the diner, the detectives swooped in to secure the dirty glass and the used napkin. They carefully placed the items in evidence bags and rushed them to the state laboratory for immediate testing. The comparison between the DNA from the diner and the DNA found at the crime scene 30 years ago would determine the fate of the investigation. The wait for the results was agonizing for Detective Miller, who had long since retired, but was brought back as a consultant for the case. He sat in the precinct break room staring at the phone and praying that this was the end of the long road. When the call finally came, the room fell silent as the lead investigator listened to the technician on the other end. The match was confirmed, and the probability of it being anyone other than Arthur Jenkins was 1 in a quadrillion. A cheer erupted in the station as tears of relief streamed down the face of the old detective, who had never given up hope. A warrant for the arrest of Arthur Jenkins was issued immediately, and a SWAT team was assembled to execute the takedown. The operation was planned for the early hours of the morning to catch the suspect off guard and minimize the risk to the public. Armored vehicles rolled silently down the dirt road, leading to the trailer where Jenkins lived. The element of surprise was crucial because police did not know if he was armed or if he would try to fight back. At dawn, the team breached the front door and apprehended Jenkins, without a single shot being fired, bringing the 30-year manhunt to a close. During the interrogation, Jenkins initially denied knowing Sarah Bennett or having any involvement in the crime. However, when confronted with the irrefutable DNA evidence placing him at the scene, his demeanor changed visibly. He slumped in his chair, and the arrogance he displayed earlier vanished, leaving behind a broken man. He eventually confessed to breaking into the house, looking for money to pay off a gambling debt, and panicking when Sarah confronted him. The confession provided the final pieces of the puzzle explaining why a man with no history of violence committed such a heinous act. The trial of Arthur Jenkins became a national sensation, drawing attention to the power of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases. The courtroom was packed with the family members of Sarah Bennett, who had waited 3 decades for this moment of accountability. Prosecutors laid out the timeline of the murder and presented the scientific evidence that linked Jenkins to the crime beyond any shadow of a doubt. The defense tried to argue that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, but the jury was not swayed by their attempts to cast doubt. The verdict was delivered swiftly, and Jenkins was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing hearing was an emotional event where Sarah Bennett's brother gave a victim impact statement that moved everyone in the courtroom to tears. He spoke about the hole left in their lives and the pain of not knowing the truth for so many years. He thanked the detectives and the genealogists who refused to let his sister be forgotten. The judge sentenced Arthur Jenkins to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never harm another innocent person. Justice had finally been served, but the scars left on the community of Willow Creek would take much longer to heal. The resolution of the Sarah Bennett case sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and inspired other agencies to reopen their own cold files. It demonstrated that no case is truly hopeless as long as biological evidence exists and technology continues to advance. The methods used to catch Jenkins became a model for modern policing, proving that the past can reach out and catch criminals who believe they have escaped judgment. Genetic genealogy centers began to pop up across the country, dedicated to identifying John and Jane Does and solving murders that had stumped police for decades. For Detective Thomas Miller, the closing of the case brought a profound sense of peace that he had not felt in 30 years. He visited Sarah Bennett's grave one last time to place a bouquet of white lilies on the headstone and whisper a quiet prayer. He knew that he could finally let go of the burden he had carried for so long and enjoy his retirement. The town of Willow Creek also began to find closure as the shadow of the unsolved murder lifted from the streets. The memory of Sarah Bennett was no longer defined by her tragic death, but by the relentless pursuit of truth that honored her life. The legacy of this case extends far beyond the borders of a small town in America. It serves as a warning to perpetrators of violent crimes that time is no longer on their side. The biological traces they leave behind act as a silent witness that can speak decades later when science unlocks their secrets. As databases grow and algorithms become more sophisticated, the number of unsolved mysteries will continue to shrink. The era of the anonymous criminal is coming to an end, thanks to the persistence of investigators and the power of DNA. However, the use of genetic genealogy also sparked a debate about privacy and the ethics of using public databases for law enforcement purposes. Civil liberties groups argued that people who upload their DNA for ancestry research did not consent to police searches of their genetic data. This legal and ethical tug of war continues to evolve as lawmakers try to balance the need for public safety with the right to privacy. The Sarah Bennett case stands at the center of this conversation, highlighting both the immense benefits and the complex questions raised by this revolutionary technology. Despite the controversies, the impact on the families of victims cannot be overstated. For those who have lived in the limbo of not knowing what happened to their loved ones, genetic genealogy offers a lifeline. It provides answers where there were only questions and delivers justice where there was only silence. The closure it brings allows families to mourn properly and move forward with their lives, knowing that the person responsible has been held accountable. This human element is the driving force behind the continued expansion of forensic genealogy units worldwide. As we look back on the 30-year journey to solve the murder of Sarah Bennett, we are reminded of the resilience of the human spirit. The detectives who never gave up, the scientists who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and the family who kept the memory of the victim alive, all played a crucial role. It is a testament to the idea that truth has a way of revealing itself eventually, no matter how deeply it is buried. The story of Willow Creek is not just a tragedy, but a triumph of perseverance and science over darkness. The tools available to detectives today would have seemed like science fiction to the officers who first walked into that crime scene in 1993. We can only imagine what future technologies will emerge to help solve the cases that remain cold today. Perhaps in another 30 years, we will look back at our current methods as primitive and marvel at the new ways justice is delivered. Until then, the work continues one file at a time, ensuring that no victim is ever truly forgotten. The file on Sarah Bennett is now officially closed and stored in the archives as a solved case. It sits alongside thousands of other solved crimes, a testament to the dedication of those who serve and protect. But for the residents of Willow Creek, the story is etched into the history of the town. They tell the tale to new generations not to scare them, but to remind them of the importance of community and the relentless pursuit of justice. The oak trees still line the streets, and the autumn leaves still fall, but the fear that once gripped the town has been replaced by a quiet resolve. In the end, the capture of Arthur Jenkins proved that evil cannot hide forever. It may take years or even decades, but the truth will always find a way to the surface. The microscopic strands of DNA that he left behind were his undoing, a biological signature that bound him to his crime across time. It is a chilling reminder to criminals everywhere that they carry the evidence of their guilt within their own cells. And for the victims, it is a beacon of hope that justice is always possible. As the sun sets over Willow Creek, the lights in the library, where Sarah once worked, flicker on, casting a warm glow on the street. Her portrait hangs in the lobby, a tribute to her life and a symbol of the justice that was finally won. The town has moved on, but it has not forgotten. The story of how DNA evidence solved a 30-year-old cold case is now part of the fabric of the community, a story of tragedy, science, and ultimate redemption. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, the wind whispers through the trees, carrying the peace that was so hard won. the intersection of history, crime, and science, gives us stories that are both terrifying and inspiring. They remind us of the fragility of life and the enduring power of truth. As we continue to explore the mysteries of the past, we must never lose sight of the human lives at the center of these cases. Sarah Bennett was not just a name in a file, but a daughter, a sister, and a friend whose life was stolen too soon. Her story is a reminder of why we must never stop searching for answers. So we leave Willow Creek with a renewed sense of hope and a deeper understanding of the tools that protect us. The world of forensic science is constantly evolving, and with each new discovery, the shadows where criminals hide become smaller. The case of the 30-year-old mystery is solved, but the mission continues. There are still names waiting to be reclaimed from the unknown, and families waiting for the knock on the door that brings the news they have waited a lifetime to hear.